Hello and welcome to this video using your home brewing and distilling skills to preserve food. This is a less often used technique known as jugging. Jugging applies the basic concept of using alcohol to preserve food, keep pathogenic organisms in check, and be safe over a long term. As a home brewer, there's a good chance that you will have some form of alcohol available that suits this approach, and you may find the way it alters the flavor of food attractive. This technique has different names based on your local dialect variations. We know it as jugging, but others have used terms like runtoff. There are a number of more famous versions of this system and approach. Notable among these is limoncello. This is where lemons have been preserved in solution, and the very volatile flavors within the lemon zest notably come out and give the alcohol a very distinctive flavor. Alcohol, by its nature, acts as a preservative. In fact, many alcohols were used for a long time to preserve specimens, to keep food in good order, and even to mummify people in ritualistic practices. For the most part, we can ignore all of that bar the parts about preserving food, assuming you're not a cannibal. The preservation works because alcohol has properties that denature proteins and will break down lipids. This then affects the cells of whatever you've immersed in it. In most important cases, we're talking about the effect on bacteria, sometimes other things as well, but mostly bacteria. The bacteria membrane has the fats and lipids in it broken up. The membrane of the bacterium is then destroyed, water moves in, and the cell is lysed. Since bacteria can't survive, the food remains fresher for longer. If you don't have your own supply of alcohol on hand, you can make do with store-bought materials. All you really need to look for is something around 40% alcohol by volume. For those of you in America, you would know this as 80 proof. Most of your whiskies, gins, brandies, vodka, and in fact any spirit really, is going to be around that. There are only a couple of exceptions, and you should just take note of what the alcohol percentage is to identify what you want. You're generally going to want to look at those we mentioned, brandy, whiskey, gin, and vodka, because they tend to balance better with whatever you're trying to preserve. The flavors aren't so overwhelming as to make it a useless exercise and destroy the flavor of the fruit, but neither are they so weak as to be relatively useless. You're looking at trying to balance the flavor. If you brew your own, you should double check the alcohol by volume to make sure it's not too strong. But other than that, you have free game to play with whatever you want. This might be a particularly useful way of using some of the less desirable batches you've brewed. Other than alcohol and fruit, you're going to need sugar. Sugar is important, and you might find that surprising. Sugar has historically been a very effective preservative. One of the reasons for this is that moisture will move out of the fruit and into the solution you're preserving with. This is because there's more dissolved in that solution, and so water, through osmosis, will follow it. Now that you've had the water move out of the fruit and into the solution, there's a sort of void, and that negative pressure will allow the alcohol to move into the fruit. This is going to balance everything out at a chemical level. One of the byproducts of this process is that you now have preserved fruit, and to a certain extent you have flavors from the fruit being taken out into the solution that you're preserving it in. The sugar also serves as a balancing factor in everything else. It helps to ensure everything mixes properly. This is one of the reasons why sugar is frequently used as an ingredient. It almost acts as a sort of go-between for all the flavors. One recipe we have here involves taking approximately 4 cups, which is not an ideal way of measuring this, but unfortunately, given the variety of things you can add, you want to work on volume rather than weight. So 4 cups of your preferred option of fruit, Berries are a good place to start as they have a strong flavour and they're striking in colour. And about the same amount of vodka. So 4 cups of vodka or a little bit less depending on how much free space there is in your container. You'll also want any additional spices, herbs, and flavourings. You will also need to have 1 cup of sugar on hand. Now that you have these 4 things present, your fruit, your alcohol, your flavourings, and your sugar, find a large glass container with an airtight lid. This can really be anything. Pasta sauce bottles are a simple but effective example of this. Once you have your ingredients, start packing the fruit into the container. Then add a little bit of your alcohol, some of your sugar, and then repeat this 3-layer process until your container is entirely full. If you're using herbs and spices, add these to make it 4 layers that you repeat. It really is that simple. Simply continue to add the various things you need to your bottle until it's completely full, and you will, in about a month to 3 months' time, be able to take out the alcohol content and the fruit and separate them, and they should each have their beneficial uses. You have a flavoured alcohol from the flavours of the fruit leaching out into it, and you have preserved fruits. It's worth noting, and this goes back to what I mentioned about sourcing your alcohol. You don't necessarily want to buy the cheapest alcohol available. You can if you're going to flavour it heavily, but if you're after something that uses the taste of the fruit and tries to build on that, you want to go for something mid-range. The most expensive alcohols are going to have subtle flavours that will get lost in everything else you're adding. The cheapest alcohol will probably have off flavours or undesirable elements that you won't necessarily be able to compensate for. If you're adding a lot of spices and herbs, that's not important. But if you're looking to create something with a bit more delicacy to it, you will need to be aware of this factor. You will get what you pay for as far as quality goes, so garbage in, garbage out. This technique has historically been used with things like brandy, sherry, and other fortified wines. The reason was fairly simple. It was able to preserve a large amount of material. Often the number of jars or other vessels available was a limiting factor. It was very effective, and it lasted for a long time. In periods where food was not as sure as it is today, this was extremely useful and surprisingly easy to do. They could often not even include things like sugar and spices, relying purely on the fruit and alcohol to achieve the results desired. Perhaps it is the fact that preserving fruit and alcohol is incredibly easy and produces 2 outcomes: a flavoured alcoholic cocktail and the preserved fruit, that it was so widely used for a time. On the other hand, perhaps it was the ease and the surety of supply that led to its use. No matter what, it's often not relied on now, there being somewhat better alternatives in the form of canning and other preservation techniques that are commercially viable. This is not so much, and often used entirely for small-scale, heirloom, artisan, or similar types of food. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.